Everybody, good morning again. Welcome back to Young Entrepreneurs of the World. As we continue our journey here on our conference first day, it's a virtual gathering of aspiring young entrepreneurs from almost any field of study, and many global experts sharing some excellent sound business advice for our young entrepreneurs. And next up here for us is going to be Newton Cheng. He is the Director of Health and Performance Program, Real Estate and Workplace Services at Google. And Newton is going to talk to us about the journey to burnout and back, a really important topic here for certainly all entrepreneurs to understand. Newton, good morning. Thanks for joining us extra early from Los Angeles. So you are up early, so we appreciate your time and look forward to your presentation.
Yes, Glenn, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for that intro. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. As Glenn said, my name is Newton Cheng, and I think of my life in three big buckets. I'm a husband and father to two amazing daughters. I'm a world champion powerlifter. And then I'm Director of Health and Performance at Google, where I oversee a suite of amenities there to support the physical, mental, social, and spiritual health and well-being of members of our Google community. I'd like to start with a story. So this is me back in 2008, and I had just graduated with my MBA from Berkeley. Originally, I was an electrical engineer by training, but I decided that I wanted to make a big career switch into the field of health and well-being. And this completely freaked out my parents. And they said, "What are you doing? You're going to throw out your degree in electrical engineering that you spent all these years earning." And I said, "Yes, I am." And so there was a lot of tension and there was a lot of unknowns, but I had just landed this great job at Google supporting the health and well-being of their employees. Now, fast forward, here I was 13 and a half years later, and I was up on stage about to give the keynote at a health and well-being conference full of industry leaders. So I went from switching careers and not knowing if this was going to work out to now being the guy on stage with the mic about to give the keynote. This was a huge moment of validation for me, and so it had to be perfect. And I spent weeks constructing and crafting and polishing that keynote. And my plan was to talk about all the amazing opportunities between health and well-being and Google technology. 3 days before that keynote, I made a key decision and I threw it out. The reason is because even though I believed every word of what I was going to say, it all felt hollow. Because the truth is, I was at the height of my struggles with depression, anxiety, and burnout. And because of the field I worked in, I knew the data, and I knew so many were suffering just like me. And we needed to talk about that. Now, I have over 20 years of experience and expertise in health and well-being, from my personal passion for the topic, from my work in the role, as well as my life as a competitive powerlifter. And that's a daunting and unique amount of experience in that field. And despite all of that, I still ended up in a bad place and went on mental health leave on January 18th of 2022. And what my therapist put on the paperwork was that I was struggling with depression, anxiety, and what's called overwork syndrome. The most honest thing I can say is that I was ashamed of how I was showing up as a husband and father, and I didn't know what else to do. We're here today to talk about mental health and burnout. And so I'm going to talk about the trends we're seeing. I'm going to share my story of burnout and tell you what that looked like. And then I'm going to tell you what happened when I returned from burnout and pushed through the stigma and just started openly telling my story at work. And then lastly, I'm going to tell you what I learned from telling my story. And my hope is that I'll offer you some insights that you're going to take with you, especially if you're on the journey of an entrepreneur, which is quite stressful, so that if you should start to feel feelings of burnout, or if those around you start to feel those feelings, that you might be able to better spot them and then take better care of yourself and others. So let's talk about the trends we're seeing. McKinsey reports that 59% of the global workforce experiences at least one mental health challenge. Similarly, Microsoft ran a survey and found that almost 1 out of 2 workers were reporting that they felt burned out at work. If you're on the journey of an entrepreneur, it can get even worse. So 49% of entrepreneurs deal with mental health issues directly, and 23% of entrepreneurs have family members who face these issues. What might be some of the underlying drivers? Well, even before the pandemic, US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy coined the term the loneliness epidemic. And that was to draw attention to the dramatic rise in loneliness around the world, as well as the huge correlations between loneliness and poor mental health. And then harder to research, but what is so resonant with so many of us right now is that the last few years have just been incredibly hard. We've been through pandemic, climate crises, social and economic issues, racial injustice, even war. There is so much suffering. Many are scared, and we're still struggling to find meaning in all of it. So that's incredibly daunting. And so I wrap that up into a statement I just called a problem. And that statement goes like this. Many were already struggling with mental health before the pandemic. This was exacerbated by our lack of connection to ourselves, each other, and maybe something greater that can knit us all together. And through all of this, the world has just gotten much scarier. All of this accelerated during the pandemic, and no one is immune. So that's what's going on at the macro level. Let's go to one specific example, and I'm going to tell you about what burnout looked like in my life. And as I go, I'm going to use actual photos from my life at the times I'm talking about so that you can see the face I was showing to the world and compare that to what was actually going on behind the scenes with me. Now, dial back to March 2020, and this is the beginning of the pandemic. The entire world had just shut down. We were all sent home from work. Those of us with kids, we lost our childcare. And we were all living under fear of this new virus, COVID-19. There was so much unknown, but what was clear to me is that this was a time of crisis. And I was taught that in a time of crisis, that's when you show up and you lean in and you lead. And so that's what we did. So my organization, which oversees a suite of on-site amenities, quickly pivoted our services to a full suite of digital amenities so that we could serve the Google community at their homes. We took on more responsibilities across the organization, and we spent more time checking in with each other, just asking, how are you doing? And it was so exhausting, but it felt like the right thing to do. Now, fast forward to summer 2020, and I was sitting in my vice president's team weekly meeting. And it was the same meeting we've had every week, but I didn't realize how pivotal this would be for me. We were doing a check-in and going around the screen, just answering the question, how are you doing? And when it got to me, for whatever reason, I started to break and I started to cry. And I said, right now I'm struggling. The number of days that I'm proud of how I'm showing up as a father is going down, and I don't know how to turn that around. And this went against so much of how I was socialized as a man, as an Asian American. And it was honestly both horrifying, but then also a huge red flag because something was clearly wrong. Now, fast forward to fall of 2020, the opportunity to take on yet more responsibilities came up. Again, this was a time of crisis, so even though I was struggling, I said yes and effectively doubled my workload overnight. November 2020 is when I first started to struggle to get out of bed. February 2021 was the first time that there was a morning where I couldn't physically get out of bed because I was just paralyzed with this sense of dread. April 2021, I went to the employee assistance provider, and they told me what I was experiencing was early signs of burnout. By October 2021, a new therapist told me I was exhibiting major symptoms of depression and anxiety. And before this, I had no diagnosis of struggles with mental health. That same therapist in November 2021 told me I was suffering from what's called high functioning depression. And here's what that looks like. So, at the height of my struggles with depression and anxiety, this is the same time that I won my first world championship in powerlifting. And the way I was raised was it doesn't matter how you feel. If something needs to be accomplished, you still show up and you get it done. And I got it done. I won the world championship. Now, a week later, this is when that keynote was happening. And as I was pivoting my keynote and planning to write one about my depression and anxiety, what I realized was this would also, this keynote would be seen by my boss, by my peers, and my team. And so I had this scary realization of like, this was just going to be out there. And so I had to decide, do I want to go back to my old keynote or do I want to put it out there? Well, I decided to get ahead of it. And I wrote up the entire keynote word for word, and I sent it to my boss, to my peers, and my team, and told them, I want you to hear this from me first versus on the recording of a keynote. 2 months later, on January 18th, I went on mental health leave. And at that point, I felt a lot of shame. I felt guilt, like I had let everyone down. I worried that maybe I was just too weak. And then I felt just so alone in my struggles. So what happened? I started sharing my story. Well, I spent 2 months on leave, and I did a lot of deep work on myself via therapy, reflection, connecting with some key friends. Through that work, I now better understand my triggers and tendencies that lead me to depression and anxiety. I came back with new behaviors, mindsets, and boundaries to practice. And more than that, knowing that so many were suffering, I returned to work determined to do what felt right. And so let me talk a little bit more about that. My vision for my career, as well as the vision for my organization at Google, is to create a thriving culture of well being that inspires people around the world to take care of themselves and each other. I had spent the last 14 years doing this through the programs we oversee. But now, having gone through this experience, I asked, what else should I do to achieve this vision? And so, at times when I am facing a really complex problem like this, I anchor to this quote from Arthur Ashe: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And I had to ask myself, was I using my voice and was I using my story? And I wasn't. So in May of 2022, I had the opportunity to go on my friend's podcast about men's mental health. And I was given the space to tell my story vulnerably and in a long form. Once that podcast came out, I published it on Instagram and Facebook and got huge amounts of positive support. But then, knowing that so much of my vision related to improving well-being in the workplace, I asked, should I show this to my professional network on LinkedIn? And immediately that just felt incredibly scary. The reason for that is, if I did that, what would happen to my reputation? What would people think of me? And if those who previously showed me respect thought less of me, what would I think of myself? With the support of some friends as well as my wife, it became clear that yes, I had to stick to my values and I had to push through the fear and I had to share. So, this is the actual post that I put on LinkedIn. Before I put this post up, I wasn't that active on LinkedIn and I might get a dozen likes on any post. This got roughly 20 times the engagement of what I would normally get. And so it was clear that there was this huge amount of energy for this conversation. So then I posted again. I posted about the difficult conversations we were having within my own team about how we make well-being the center of our team culture. I talked about the intersections of mental health and my identity as an Asian American and how sometimes those things clash. And I had talked about all the deep wisdom that I learned from my career as a powerlifter and how I was using that to inform how I returned from burnout. Now, each of those got huge engagement online, but what was really even more insightful were the direct messages and real life engagement that came from me putting my story out there. So, what did I learn from putting my story out there? Well, via all that direct engagement, what I found was that there is far more suffering than we can see. Now, the McKinsey data I showed said that roughly, or the Microsoft data showed that roughly 1 out of 2 of us are struggling with burnout at work. Now, if you were to look around you, you might not see it. But the people who have reached out to me to say, I'm struggling too, they are junior to me. They are my peers. They are senior to me. They are both inside and outside of Google. They are all around us, but it all stays hidden due to stigma. Now, second, as I tell my story, no one's reaction is ever, that is the most amazing and unique story I've ever heard. What they tell me is, so much of what you said in your story sounds just like my story. And so the insight there is that the magic is not in the story itself, it's in the act of vulnerability. So when I vulnerably share my story, that enables deeper connection with the person hearing that story. That deeper connection enables harder conversations around things like shame and guilt. And when we can have those hard conversations, that's what leads to the hope for change. And it is that simple and it is that powerful. But it also requires a lot of courageous leadership to put yourself out there. And the third insight is that can be built like a muscle. So the ability to be vulnerable can be built gradually over time. In order to do that, I like to use Carol Robbins' 15% rule, where you have the zone of comfort in the middle. And that's where you can do any behavior that is just totally comfortable to you and has no risk. Then you have the zone of danger on the outside. And that's where you want to try something that's just way too risky. In between is the zone of learning. And that's where you can stretch a little bit and feel a little bit of risk and still do the behavior. And that's where growth happens. So vulnerability can be built by stretching just 15% out of your comfort zone over and over and built up like a muscle. And once you've built up that vulnerability, one of the most powerful things we can do is name those hard feelings because so many of people are feeling them as well. And that the value of that, it goes two ways. So first, for ourselves, the way author Tony Schwartz puts it is that noticing and naming emotions gives us the chance to take a step back and make choices about what to do with them. And then for others, when you name the hard things, that can help them understand their own experience and more importantly, feel less alone. So it's truly a gift both for yourself and for others. So I just gave you 4 insights. Where do we go from here? And for a review, this is the problem that we are facing. Now, for me, as a leader in the workplace, this is what I'm doing. I've committed to telling my story everywhere I can for at least 12 months. And when I started, I didn't know if anyone would care. But for the last 12 months, my speaking schedule has been packed full. And I've had over 1.5 million impressions on LinkedIn because, again, there is so much energy for this conversation. And then what am I going to do next? Well, I'm figuring it out as I go, like so many of you who are entrepreneurs. As Jacqueline Novogratz, who's the CEO and founder of Acumen Fund, puts it, once we've taken a step forward, the work will teach us where to take a second step, and then a third, and so on. And so that's what I'm doing. And what about you? So, you, as an aspiring entrepreneur, as a rising business leader, someday you're going to be up on that stage holding that mic. And what kind of leader will you choose to be? Knowing that so many may be struggling, and they're going to be looking to you to ask, how do we take care of ourselves and each other? And then what about at the personal level? So on the left here, this is a picture of my dad, and he is my hero. He taught me about love, respect, community, family, mental toughness, and grit. But he never taught me about mental health because no one taught him. On the right, this is me with my daughters. And I've decided that I am going to be open about my struggles with depression and anxiety with them. And I'm teaching them about mental health so that if they are to go through something similar, they'll know what that looks like. And more important than that, they'll know it's going to be okay because we love each other and we're going to be there to take care of each other. Now, these are the 4 insights that I left you with. And if you believe these, I want you to think about, what if we all remembered that there is more suffering than we can see? And if you keep that in mind, you worked on being more vulnerable, gradually, more and more over time. And as you did that, you named your struggles a little more openly and honestly. If we could all do those things, what new and deeper connections could we make with one another? And via those deeper connections, what conversations could we start that we cannot have today? And via those conversations, what change might be possible for you and your loved ones, for the organizations that you're going to build in the future, and for the world? Thank you.
Newton, thank you very, very much. What a tremendous, courageous presentation. Thank you for sharing. What a wonderful family.
Thank you.
The photos were so touching. There's so much we can all learn from this and grow from your presentation. Stigma is a terrible thing, as you mentioned, and having the courage to kind of go step by step, as you said, and perhaps what can I do next, and whether it's 15% coming out of a comfort zone, or lowering your guard and being vulnerable, it takes so much courage to do that. You mentioned loneliness. I'm a longtime Neil Diamond fan, and he has a song, "I Am, I Said," and there's a line in that came to mind when I was listening to your fabulous presentation, and it's, "I never cared for the sound of being alone." And we can all, we can all grow from that, as first as humans, and as fellow people and friends, and then certainly up and through the workplace as well. And your story and the wonderful work you're doing in this area is just tremendous.
Thank you.
And we can't thank you enough for sharing that today with our audience. Again, Newton Cheng, Google professional, champion powerlifter, but probably most important, husband and father.
Definitely most important.
For sure. So Newton, thank you for so much for this presentation. It's incredible. We should never lose sight of this. We're all in this together, and sometimes it just, asking, as you said, checking in with each other from time to time. We're all so busy, right? There's so much going on in our lives here, and just sometimes taking that breath before you dive into whatever business you have to do, or whatever the reason you may be someplace. Having that first, just to pull back for a second, it may make all the difference in the world for somebody in that moment, and then maybe the rest of their day, and looking forward. So fantastic
Absolutely.
job. Thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. Newton Cheng from Google, Journey to Burnout and Back. Congratulations on all your good work, and best of luck here in the future. And please stay in touch.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Stelios. And good luck to you on the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself. Be well.
You too.
Bye.